Good morning. Today is Thursday, March 27, 2025. Yesterday, we explained the workings of the lunar cycle, the way in which, in actuality, the lunar cycle begins at a moment that's called conjunction, or in Hebrew, kibbutz. But that moment is invisible. It is during the hours that the moon is not visible to us because of the position that it's in. There is another term, molad, which means the rebirth of the moon, but it's not the actual moment, it's the average, because the actual length of each lunar cycle differs one from the other. It's not exact. So the molad is the average. And we discussed yesterday how it could be that the molad is not on the same day as Rosh Chodesh, because it sounds like the molad should be the beginning of the month. But often, like this Shabbos, we're going to announce the molad is on Saturday morning, Shabbos morning, but Rosh Chodesh is not till Sunday. Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the first month of the beginning, the first day of the beginning of the beginning of the month of Nisan is on Sunday. So how come it's not on the same day? And we explain that there's another term, and that is phasis. Phasis means shortly after the conjunction, when the moon reappears, when you can see in the sky the slightest crescent, that is what we call the new moon. And phasis means young moon, that's what it means. And we learned that it is up to the Sanhedrin, the great court in Jerusalem, to hear witnesses say that they saw the new moon in the sky, to examine them to make sure they're telling the truth, and then to determine today is Rosh Chodesh, the beginning of the Jewish month. And that means that will determine whatever holidays are coming up that month. So it is not dependent on the actual astronomical phenomenon. It is dependent on the proclamation of the Sanhedrin. At the end of the Sanhedrin period, somewhere around the year 400, 450 of the Common Era, when the Sanhedrin was nearing its end, would no longer continue, the last Sanhedrin calculated in advance the calendar of when Rosh Chodesh should be each month going into the future, all the way until Mashiach comes. And so now each month is already, so to speak, pre-sanctified by that Sanhedrin all those years ago. So while the kibbutz, the actual conjunction, or the molad, which is the average time of that conjunction, is a guideline to when Rosh Chodesh is, we said yesterday, it does not determine Rosh Chodesh. Because the Torah says, and this is from the special reading that we will read this Shabbos, the fourth of four special readings, Parshas HaChodesh, Vayomer Hashem el Moshe vel Aaron beretz Mitzrayim lemor. God spoke to Moshe and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, HaChodesh hazeh lochem rosh chodashim. This shall be for you the beginning of the first month. God commanded on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the first day of the month of Nisan, that we should follow a lunar calendar. That's the first mitzvah that was given by God through Moshe to the entire Jewish people. And it's important that it happened in Egypt. God spoke to them b'Mitzrayim, in Egypt. So if it was Rosh Chodesh Nisan, it was about 2 weeks before the actual Exodus. So this mitzvah was given to the Jewish people while we were still slaves in Egypt. And the message of the mitzvah is that it's up to us. It's up to the Sanhedrin, it's up to the Jewish people to proclaim when Rosh Chodesh is. And this is the mark of freedom and the end of slavery. That's why this mitzvah is so important. Because for a slave, Time doesn't matter. Slave is always obligated to the master. So it doesn't matter if it's morning or afternoon or daytime or nighttime. It's all the same to a slave. Freedom means I decide what I do and I decide when to do it. So Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the beginning of the month of Nisan, and the command to use the lunar calendar as our calendar begins the process of Exodus. Yes, we only leave Egypt 2 weeks later, but the beginning of the process and the ending of the mentality of slavery, that starts on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. The process of leaving slavery begins with this mitzvah of the lunar calendar, following the lunar calendar, because Rosh Chodesh, the system of proclaiming the beginning of the lunar month, that system proclaims that we are no longer subject to time. We establish time. We establish our calendar. And this is a gift that is given to us by God on this Rosh Chodesh to express that we are God's partner. God established Shabbos to commemorate the creation of the world. So God establishes that every seventh day is Shabbos. We establish the date of Pesach to commemorate the creation of Am Yisrael, of the Jewish people. And so far does this partnership go that, so to speak, God says, with this mitzvah, God says, I, God, will follow you, will follow your decision about when Rosh Chodesh is, and therefore when each holiday is. And therefore God says, I will judge the world on the day that you say it's Rosh Hashanah. And I will forgive on the day that you say is Yom Kippur. We see this reflected in the bracha, the blessing that we say every Shabbos and every Yom Tov and every Rosh Chodesh. So on Shabbos and Yom Tov and Rosh Chodesh, instead of, when we say the Amidah, instead of the multiple paragraphs that we say during the week, we have one paragraph and one blessing. On Shabbos, the blessing that we ends this middle section is Baruch Atah Hashem, blessed are you God, Mekadesh HaShabbos, you sanctify the Shabbos. God sanctifies Shabbos because it happens every seventh day. So God sets when Shabbos is, and we follow what God says. But on Rosh Chodesh and on Yom Tov, the bracha is different. Baruch Atah Hashem, blessed are you God, Mekadesh Yisrael v'hazmanim. God, we bless you, God, that you, God, sanctified Israel, and Israel sanctifies the times. In other words, God has sanctified us, given us the authority to determine how to work the calendar with the guideline of the lunar cycles, but we determine it. And so God has given us this authority to be God's partner, and therefore we set, by being sanctified by God, we set when Rosh Chodesh is, and therefore when Pesach is, and when Yom Tov is, and we sanctify the times. We sanctify Rosh Chodesh, Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, etc. And that's the significance of this mitzvah. The first mitzvah given to the Jewish people while still slaves in Egypt, B'Mitzrayim. The message is, you are no longer slaves. You are princes and princesses. God says to us with this mitzvah, you are my partner in ordering the universe. You abide by my decisions, God says to us. You abide by my mitzvos. And God says, I will abide by your decisions about when the Rosh Chodesh and Yom Tov will fall. I'm going to share with you a story that exemplifies how deserving we are of this exalted position to be God's partner, to be able to establish and have God follow what we say. You may have seen this. I saw it on Facebook. It's a story that's told by Shira Pasternak Be'eri. It happened a couple of days ago. You may know, if you're following the news, I'm sure you are, that these days the morale in Israel is unfortunately quite low. Hostages are still there. Negotiations seem to have broken down about the hostages, about ending the war, about what will happen. And then there are all the conflicts within the Jewish people, within Israel, conflicts over the politics, conflicts between Haredim and the laws to have them serve in the army and the resistance to that. There's a lot of controversy, and the morale is not so high right now. Aside from that, the Houthis are back in action. A few hours ago, there were alerts in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem about missiles coming. Baruch Hashem, thank God nothing happened, but the morale is low. So a couple of days ago in Jerusalem, there was a lot of chaos because there were roads blocked. And what happens sometimes with these protests, this was a protest of Haredim, but it's happened with other groups also. And what people do in these sometimes in these protests is they have a group of people, they just lay down in the street. So it could be a street, it could be a highway, and they just lay down and they don't move for hours. So traffic stops. And of course, people are in their cars, in buses, and they're frustrated because they're not moving for hours. And whether they agree or disagree, nobody's happy to be stuck like that. So it was one such day a couple of days ago. The roads were blocked. Buses and cars were not moving. And just getting home felt impossible. So there was a woman, and she said to herself, maybe she'll just walk home because the traffic is not moving. But she had bags. She was doing some shopping, and she had bags. It was heavy. It was far, and she decided she's going to get on the bus. At least it was very cold out. At least it'll be warm. At least she could sit down. She gets on the bus. The bus is packed, mostly with older people because younger people who could walk were walking because the bus is not moving. Mostly with older people and with a lot of people who didn't really quite understand what was going on and why they were not moving. And at one point, an older woman on this bus, she was just overwhelmed by the situation. And she started shouting in frustration. She was just yelling and shouting, what's going on? What's going on? So there was a young girl sitting near her. And this girl walked over to her and said in a very soft voice, it's okay. We all feel the same way. Just take a deep breath. I'll get you some water. Everything will be okay. The people around really appreciated this kindness that the girl was doing, but it didn't do much to calm this older woman. And time continued to pass, and it was over an hour that they're sitting, not moving. And now this same older woman, she's over her limit. She burst out. She just can't take it anymore. And she started yelling, I can't take it anymore. What kind of a country is this? What kind of people are these? And she added, and I'm hungry. I haven't eaten all day. And she's yelling and screaming this. Directly behind this woman was a young Haredi woman. Now, this young woman was also stressed because she was trying to get home to nurse her baby. And you can imagine how uncomfortable she was. So the young Haredi woman comes close to this older woman who's so upset, and she says to her, what do you like to eat? And the woman says to her, pizza with mushrooms. So without any hesitation, this young Haredi woman gets off the bus. She leaves her bags there. She leaves her stuff there because the bus is not moving. She leaves the bus. And this 16-year-old girl, the little girl who had tried to come before, comes with her. So these two women leave the bus and they disappear. They disappear. And a few minutes later, they come back. They come back not just with pizza for this hungry woman, but with pizza for everybody. They brought back several whole pizzas and some bottles of water and some other foods, and they give the pizza, I guess it had mushrooms, to this woman, and then they walk up and down the aisle and they give pizza and food and water to everybody. And after this woman, the older woman who had been so angry, who had really lost it, she had some food, she had something to drink, so she was in a little bit better of a mood. And then she started to bless everyone on the bus. To each person, I bless you, I bless you, I bless you. And then she spoke to the driver of the bus. Listen to this. She said, driver, you will never forget today. You will never forget what wonderful people you had on your bus as you sat in traffic in Jerusalem today. That is the people. We are the people who God calls his partners, princes and princesses, deserving of being able to determine time for ourselves. And that process starts with the mitzvah that we will read in this week's Torah special portion. Achodesh hazeh lachem Rosh Chodeshim. It will be for you. You will determine when Rosh Chodesh is and when Pesach is. My friends, I wish you a great day, and I look forward to seeing you soon in person.